Consider this: 8,700 shippers and receivers of raw, intermediate, and finished goods at 17,300 locations depend on Norfolk Southern Railway for safe, reliable service. The railroad moves 170,000 rail cars and operates some 560 trains across its 20,000-mile system every day to serve those customers. So how do those 170,000 cars move through the Norfolk Southern system? Some freight moves in unit trains, trains consisting of the same commodity traveling from a single origin to a single destination. But most does not. This story is about single carloads moving by themselves from specific origins to specific destinations. This story is not about operations in conjunction with other railroads. It's only about what happens for each carload, whether a boxcar, tank car, automobile rack, or something else, moving solely on Norfolk Southern.
Our goal is to minimize the number of times a car must be handled, the distance it has to travel, and the time it takes to get from origin to destination. We balance those factors with the relative needs of our customers to move each car through the network as efficiently and as safely as possible. It's complicated because our network is complicated and each of the customers have unique traffic flows. Even with the latest in computer modeling and planning tools, on average we will handle a freight car moving from an origin on NS to a destination on NS at least 3 times. Many cars are handled even more.
To start, a local train picks up cars at their origin facility. The local might have to make multiple movements in order to place cars at the facility and to pull cars that are just starting their trips. The local takes the pulled cars to an origin serving yard, which is the site of the first handling event.
Here, the cars are broken apart. Cars are moved and grouped together into blocks of cars through a process called switching. Each block is a group of cars that are all headed for the same next stop on the Norfolk Southern system for further handling. A car might have to be moved several times before it ends up in the correct outbound block.
In most origin serving yards, switching is accomplished by a locomotive pushing and pulling cars over a group of tracks until the cars are grouped together in the appropriate blocks. That's called flat switching. Some of the blocks will be coupled together to form a train that will go to a larger yard for further processing. When the road train arrives at the larger yard, the second handling occurs. In a classification yard, Norfolk Southern performs 3 separate functions. It receives the cars from the inbound road train in the receiving yard, then it separates or classifies the cars onto separate tracks for distinct destinations in the classification yard. Then it assembles cars into trains for outbound movement in the forwarding yard. The road train pulls into the receiving yard. In the receiving yard, the locomotives are detached. Other locomotives are used to move the train in the yard.
At this point, yard locomotives shove the detached cars up the hump, where a crew member breaks the cars apart. Cars roll over the hump and are gravity-fed at speeds adjusted by retarders into the classification area, or bowl, which is a web of tracks. The cars move fast enough to couple securely with the other cars, but slowly enough not to damage the freight in each other. Certain types of cars, particularly those containing toxic inhalation hazards such as chlorine and anhydrous ammonia, cannot go over the hump. They must be pushed or pulled around the yard or flat switched in order to be classified.
In any event, cars headed for the same next stop all go to the same classification track. In the forwarding yard, crews pull cars out of the classification tracks and combine those groups of cars into road trains. Then there's a thorough safety inspection. After that, road trains, well, they hit the road.
Often cars need to go through multiple hump yards and be reclassified multiple times to get from an origin on Norfolk Southern to a destination on Norfolk Southern.
The next stop is the destination serving yard. That's the yard near the receiving customer. Here, the third handling takes place. A yard locomotive switches the appropriate cars off the train and puts them on a local train that serves industries in the area. The local train then delivers the cars to the destination facility. Now we've come to the end of our trip. Car handling began at a local business, continued in the origin receiving yard, then the major classification yard or yards, depending on the movement of each individual car, then the destination serving yard, and now are delivered to the destination.
Moving all those individual cars to the network is more complex, consumes more resources, and is more costly than operating unit trains. Those big trains of the same commodity and equipment, all repeatedly going to and from the same places. Most of the planning and details you don't even see, but Norfolk Southern spends a lot of time creating a plan for each car that minimizes these handlings and results in the most efficient Norfolk Southern system possible.
You can see that even when rail cars need to move on only the Norfolk Southern system, a number of handlings are required, and every handling requires a lot of work to make it happen. The handling picture becomes even more complex should those cars need to be exchanged with other railroads. But that's another story.